Hey everyone, we're going to be talking about the thyroid today, which is such a common topic in my clinical practice. I work in the integrative world, and fatigue has always been one of my specialties. So, of course, I end up seeing a lot of thyroid patients, and people will always ask, like, what is there to do with thyroid? You run the labs, you see the numbers, do the medicine, you rerun the labs, and then the job is done. Like easy peasy, right? But not so much. That's why so many people seek out integrative care for thyroid issues. And for some, that approach is great, right? Everything will work out well. However, there are so many people that I see in my practice whose labs aren't quite in that range for medication, but they're still feeling all of the thyroid symptoms. And then there are those whose labs will regulate with medication, but their symptoms don't subside, right? So there's so many cases when we need a little bit of additional support. And that's what we're going to talk about today, how to get that little bit of additional support through natural means, little lifestyle tips, some dietary tips, and then some herbs or nutrients that I use pretty frequently to support and optimize thyroid function. So let's jump into some of the things I see in general practice. So our thyroid basically controls our thyroid hormone amounts, and those thyroid hormones control almost everything metabolic or touch it in some way. So we want these hormones to be very, very regulated. When we've got too little thyroid hormone, we'll experience some sort of hypothyroidism. And this is an umbrella that covers many things. So there's general hypothyroidism, where we're just making less thyroid hormone than what's optimal. Hashimoto's is a hypothyroidism of an autoimmune origin. And what happens there is we create antibodies that attack our thyroid, which obviously affects thyroid hormone production and will have a resulting hypothyroidism. And clinically, I do address Hashimoto's cases with a specific touch. Those are often the people who will begin medication and then their labs will normalize, but their symptoms kind of remain and they need a little assistance with that autoimmune piece to really get to where they want to go. Then there's that subclinical hypothyroidism. And this covers a lot of different subcategories, but for a general picture so that we can kind of move on and get to the fun stuff, these are the folks that start feeling some thyroid symptoms like fatigue, weight gain, hair loss, or others, and then they go to their doctor. They get their thyroid tested, and it's usually just a quick TSH screening lab. And that lab is normal, or it's not quite out of range enough for medication. And this can be several things. Sometimes this is an autoimmune issue, and we don't always test the antibodies on screening labs, so they can be missed. Sometimes someone's ratio for hypothyroidism doesn't fall into the standard lab ranges that we use for everyone. And sometimes someone will have a conversion issue. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on another slide, but that's essentially when someone is making their thyroid stimulating hormone, but their body is not converting it into the active form very well. So their labs will appear normal from a screening perspective, but they are actually in a state of a functional hypothyroidism. And we can also have too much thyroid hormone, which is a negative thing as well, right? It feels just as bad. It's just as hard on our body. Hypothyroidism is a bit more common, so it gets all the glory and it gets a lot of the talk, but it's important to note that these ailments can go both ways. So it's important for our thyroid to be in range for heart health, metabolic health, general function, but it can also really, really affect us symptomatically. I mean, this is one of those conditions where people will feel it when something is wrong a lot of times, right? And that's what we're going to talk about here. How do we make sure that we're optimizing ourselves functionally so that we feel great, we perform well, because the symptom list is no fun. When we don't have enough thyroid hormone, we're going to feel sluggish, tired, we're going to have trouble maintaining our weight. Constipation is very common, hair loss is very common. Basically, everything just runs slowly. It's slowed down. Our whole metabolic process is slowed down. Our hair turnover, endocrine metabolism, everything. And then on the other end, when we've got too much thyroid hormone, things are going in a little bit of an overdrive. So commonly someone will feel like they've had way too much caffeine and they're just really on edge. Like heart palpitations are really common, sweating and jitters and insomnia and mood swings. And these symptoms, it's important to note, aren't always 100% in their own camp, right? Sometimes we'll see people with a hyperthyroid experiencing some hypo symptoms just because they run and then they burn out, right? And then we also have some people, I have some patients that kind of fluctuate and they'll go, you support the thyroid a little bit and they're way up here and then they come back down. So these things can kind of cross over. So today we're going to focus on the things that we can do adjunctively to support these patients, right? So here's what I look to when someone comes in and says, my thyroid has issues, but my labs have gotten into normal range. My meds are at a good level for me is what my endocrinologist is saying, or my primary care provider is saying. What else is there? So here's where we look for support to get them where we want to go, right? Stress can majorly affect the thyroid and its functioning. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that works in a moment, but it's so important to mitigate stress when the thyroid is acting up. If someone has thyroid issues of an autoimmune origin, we're going to attempt to minimize antibodies, which will aid so much in symptoms. It's a different approach and explains why someone might be feeling a little crummy when their TSH labs are normal, right? Nutrition. Can't forget, we can never forget nutrition. Food is always medicine. It has a direct impact on everything, but specific nutrients are so vital to the thyroid, while others, even some healthy foods, can be hard on the thyroid for some. So we'll talk about some of those nutritional tips that actually make a big difference here. Hormones play a huge role because all of our hormones play together, right? Either for better or for worse, but they all affect each other. And those hormones are affected by our sleep, age, environmental triggers, stress, and tons of other factors. So let's go in here. So stress deserves its own presentation or its own entire wellness week at the bare minimum. It affects so many symptoms in the body, and the thyroid is included in that. So there are multiple ties between the two, but the quick and dirty is that stress affects all of our hormones. We get stressed, and then the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, turns on, and it initiates the stress response. And the stress response is there to help us deal with our stress physically. Our body can't really differentiate whether we're being attacked by a robber, we're being held up in the parking garage, or our boss is just razzing us at work and giving us a hard day. It just feels the stress and it prepares us for the worst. So any functions that aren't essential for us to run away or fight back against the robber, throw our hardest punch, or, lift a car, the mom's strength to lift the car with the adrenaline, something like that. Everything that doesn't have to do with that in our body is suppressed. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary, or the H and the P of the HPA axis, are responsible for the production and regulation of so many hormones, essential hormones, including thyroid hormone. So the hypothalamus normally will read how much thyroid hormone is circulating around it, and it waits until it sees that thyroid hormone is getting a little low in the body, and then it produces a hormone called thyroid releasing hormone. That's the hypothalamus up here in our brain. It goes down and it tells the pituitary to release TSH, that's thyroid stimulating hormone, into the body. That one might be familiar to some of you guys that have seen doctors for thyroid. TSH is usually the hormone that's most commonly tested for thyroid function. That's that screening lab that a lot of us get on our annuals, especially as we're getting older. Then that TSH goes and it tells the thyroid. So we've got up here, our brain's making the hormones that are going to go down and tell our thyroid to make and release T4, or thyroxine, which is released into the bloodstream and then eventually converted into T3, or the active form of the hormone that is ready to go and regulate our metabolism. So it seems like a complicated process with a lot of steps, but our body is really great at this. I mean, really great. It operates on a feedback loop that keeps our hormones very tightly regulated. So our brain will take note when, something's low or something's high, and it keeps everything where we want it to be. However, stress throws a wrench into that hypothalamic function altogether, because it is always going to prioritize immediate needs like stress to general maintenance, like general metabolism and those kind of things. The brain will say, hey, we'll catch up on thyroid later. We'll catch up on digestion later. We'll catch up on, ovulation, fertility, all that stuff later. We need to make sure that we've got cortisol. We're releasing glucose and adrenaline, and we're ready to throw down if it comes to it, right? Like we could be getting attacked. We got to be ready. And now when that stress becomes chronic, you can see how this can create big problems. And the thyroid is so, so sensitive to this. It's also important to note that cortisol is also a known trigger for autoimmune diseases. So if someone is genetically predisposed or just has the stars align against them in some way, stress can be a trigger for Hashimoto's or Graves' as well. And I actually see that very commonly. That's not a random thing. So just reduce stress, right? That's the medical recommendation. I hate it. I hate when people will say, oh, I'm supposed to reduce my stress. It's one of those things that gets under my skin in the industry because so many times stress is unavoidable for us, right? It's not like we can just quit our jobs and just move to Greece and lay on the beach or whatever. No one can just snap their fingers and be stress-free. If whatever we can do to get those stressors out of our life, whether it's changing situations or whatever, is obviously good for our body. But medically, it's vital for so many reasons, and the thyroid is so stress sensitive. So we have to employ some tools to help us overcome some of our daily life stress that we just can't avoid with our current lifestyle. So, everyone likes to scoff at the deep breathing and meditation recommendations, but I want to say that those two things probably have the most compelling clinical research of anything else on this list, of any medication, of any SSRI, and they're free and they're doable. It's one of those things that's hard to create the habit for, but it is so valuable. So if you want a different approach than some of those two, exercise helps to regulate our cortisol levels and therefore level out our HPA axis. So finding something physical that works for you is ideal, right? Whether it's one of these things, exercise, deep breathing, meditation, preferably all three, bring it in there. Sleep. It's so important. Insufficient sleep throws off our cortisol rhythms and will further exacerbate the effects of stress on hormone production. So those two can get into kind of a bad actor cycle where they're just making each other worse. So if someone's just staying up late for kicks, we got to get the discipline going. It's like turn off the TV, go to bed. But I find with people when we're dealing with stress more often than not, that someone is getting less quality sleep because they just can't turn their brain off and their mind's racing. They're like, I gotta do this. And in those cases, I'll use some tools to kind of create some new habits and get their body back in a better place. GABA is one of my favorite supplements to utilize in that case when the brain's just running. It's our GABA, endogenously GABA in our body is our predominant inhibitory neurotransmitter, meaning it brings us back down when we're like up. It's just like, it induces the alpha brain waves that are calming, kind of like, okay, no big deal, rather than, oh, I got to do this and I got to do this and I can't forget this and I got to put this on the list. So I love GABA for that. It's just kind of that like chill thing. It's not like a sleeping pill. You can take GABA during the day. I have a lot of patients that take GABA during the day too, which I enjoy because I don't really like to set habits that are sleep inducing at night when we're trying to improve sleep. I like more of, kind of relaxing and practicing working with the brain in that way. GABA pairs really well with L-theanine. They have a very similar mechanism because L-theanine is actually a precursor to GABA. So, and the research shows that they actually enhance each other's effects when they're taken together because of that precursor and final relationship. It kind of gives you a boost to create a little extra, helps cover all the bases. So there's a supplement I use, it's not even in here because I wasn't going to talk about it, but it's called 200 milligrams of Zen. That I love for this. I've used this in my patients for a really long time. It's GABA and L-theanine together. And I've just had fantastic results with it clinically for over 10 years. It's probably one of my most prescribed supplements because it just does have such positive effects for my patients. They always feel it pretty soon after beginning it. So I love to utilize that one. Other things that are great if you need an additional stress relief boost that's greater than kind of the lifestyle and those kind of things that we're talking about is ashwagandha. It's an herb, it's an adaptogen, meaning it protects our body from the harmful effects of cortisol and helps us adapt physically to those stressors that we can't avoid. So I'll use ashwagandha in just a tincture alone. I have a lot of people who don't like tinctures because they don't taste great and they're kind of hard to take. You got to do it all day, but I'll do it that way. And then I'll also use it kind of in formulas that 200 milligrams of Zen formula that I mentioned has another similar sister called Zen Adapt that is the GABA L-theanine, and then it throws in the ashwagandha too. So if someone is really struggling in the stress department, I'll grab that one to kind of cover additional bases. Stress reduction, whether through lifestyle approaches or utilizing some extra tools, is just absolutely paramount to thyroid support. So we can't forget it. Nutrition. I get asked about this one constantly. How do I utilize food as medicine for the thyroid? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it gives me an opportunity to hop on top of my food as medicine soapbox, which is my favorite. And I like to say that I'm not a one size fits all dietary person. I think different therapeutic diets work for different conditions and different people. And I like to say that before I mention the G word that's coming up here, because there's inevitably someone that's going to tune out and say, oh, she's just one of those that thinks gluten is the devil. And that is just not me, y'all. I like a beer on a sunny day just as much as the next gal. However, there are very strong implications in the research of the correlation between celiac disease and Hashimoto's. The two travel together very, very frequently. And we'll see a lot of people that do not have celiac, but will have genetic markers for it without the full expression, turn up with Hashis as well. So for me, thyroid issues with an autoimmune tie are going to consistently get a recommendation to go gluten-free. Sorry, not sorry, because you will see numbers and symptoms improve almost universally. I see that very frequently. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'd place the bet every single time. Cut gluten to keep thyroid antibodies low. It improves the function. Now, let's see. Some of the most important nutrients to mention for thyroid are iodine, selenium, and zinc. We can move thyroid mountains with these three, right? Iodine is one of the building blocks of thyroid hormone. I mean, we make our thyroid hormone out of iodine and tyrosine. That's what it's made out of. So we can't make it in its absence. T4 is that tyrosine base with 4 iodines around it, and T3 with 3, hence the name triiodothyronine. It helps preserve the shape and size of the thyroid. That's what iodine does. So when we're iodine deficient, we'll see a goiter start to form, or that enlargement of the thyroid that sort of looks like a blob on the neck, or sometimes we'll feel it. Some people will even mention like trouble swallowing or feeling like a sensation in their neck. But that is a sign that the thyroid's not functioning optimally. It's swelling. It's trying really hard to keep up. Oftentimes iodine is very, very necessary in those cases. Selenium and iodine work together to protect the thyroid. So selenium makes iodine more efficient, if that makes sense. On its own, selenium protects the thyroid from oxidative damage. It's got some antioxidant properties. And it's also one of the best clinical tools that I've used to reduce antibodies for those with an autoimmune thyroiditis or a Hashimoto's. So if I've got autoimmune thyroid issues, they're going to be on selenium in my practice. If someone comes in and they're saying, hey, I've got Hashimoto's, I started my Synthroid, my labs got back to normal, but my antibodies, I just can't get them down. A lot of times selenium supplementation will get where we're trying to go with those. Zinc contributes to the conversion of T4 to T3. So remember, that's the conversion process that gets us to the active form, right? So sometimes there's a hang up right there. Some people will have normal TSH levels, normal organic thyroid hormone production, but issues with conversion into that active form of thyroid hormone, or the one that we feel. So zinc is a cofactor in this conversion process, but it also aids in the peripheral cellular sensitivity to T3. So how the tissues react to the T3 when they see it, they'll be a little more sensitive. They'll take it on a little bit more, right? So this means that zinc not only aids in the production and activation of thyroid hormone, but our body's usage of it as well. Zinc does everything, right? I mean, it's one of those. Thyroid superfoods, an interesting tidbit that I love to share because nobody believes me, but Brazil nuts are probably the best dietary source of selenium out there. And I mean, they're rich in selenium. So for those who don't like supplements for whatever reason, I'll prescribe a daily dose of Brazil nuts for them. And it does wonderful things. I will see the antibodies move just the same as if we're doing either a pill form of selenium or I use a dropper form of selenium a lot because some people get a little bit of a pill fatigue. But Brazil nuts are also an option there. Seaweed, obviously, is a great source of iodine. In countries like Japan, they consume a lot more seaweed than we do, and they have far less incidence of goiter, and they have for centuries. And the numbers are pretty overwhelming there, and it has to do with the dietary iodine intake. Here in the States where I live, our predominant source of iodine, dietary iodine as a country is mostly salt. And a lot of people have turned to, healthier salt options. People are being a little more health conscious. So we're not eating that iodized Morton salt as frequently. And people are coming back to iodine deficiencies, right? So seaweed is a great snack for those. And while we're talking about nutrition and the thyroid, I just want to touch on goitrogens because I get questions about this. So goitrogens are foods that can have a negative effect on thyroid function by inhibiting the body's ability to use iodine. So I get these questions all the time, or I see people saying that we shouldn't eat broccoli because it's bad for the thyroid. No, okay, let's scratch that. Get that idea out of your heads, okay? Every single item on this list is one that I view as a healthy and nourishing food in a lot of conditions. So that there's a conundrum there, right? Because they're known to inhibit the body's ability to use iodine, which could have some effect on the thyroid, right? So what does this mean for the thyroid? Well, clinically, what it means to me is if someone is really, really struggling with thyroid issues, I'll tell them to make sure that they're not eating one thing on this list every single day. Some people are meal preppers and they're just like, I eat the exact same thing for lunch every single day. I eat chicken and broccoli every single day. Oh, good for you. Whew, that's rough. But, if they eat it every single day, it's important to sort of change up our nutrients so we're not getting the same type of goitrogen that works in the same way, right? So rotating these can be very, very helpful. Cooking these vegetables also, rather than eating them raw, if you've got some thyroid stuff going on, can minimize the goitrogenic effects. It can kind of take that down a little bit. So kind of cooking these either lightly or so you still get a lot of nutritional value, but you take down the goitrogenic effects is great. You can also increase your iodine intake to overcome that obstacle because the iodine shortage is really what causes the issue, not the foods themselves, right? So taking a little bit of extra iodine or eating a little extra seaweed or something like that can help kind of counterbalance that a bit. And this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but it's worth mentioning when we're talking about thyroid health, because inevitably I will get the question like, what about goitrogens if we're talking about nutrition, because it's very popular online to talk about this stuff and say, if you have thyroid issues, you can't ever have broccoli or kale ever again. And I just want to say that's not necessarily true. There are strategies to bring those things in so you're not missing out on all those nutrients. All right, let's get into supplementation. I like to get on a little mini soapbox before this part. Always, 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 when we're taking an integrative approach, we're not just doing the pill for an ill model, right? That's not what integrative medicine is about. There's a reason I bring up lifestyle approaches and factors first. And that's because if you want real recovery, real improvement, this isn't an either or thing. These supplements will help and will improve your symptoms, support your thyroid or whatever they're intended for, but that will be much better when combined with the lifestyle approaches as well. I also have people that will do all the work and they need that extra boost to get back to where they want to be symptomatically or functionally, lab-wise, whatever it is. And that's where these supportive supplements just really shine. And that's the way I like to use integrative medicine. A little of this, a little of that in a perfect combination to manage a patient's symptoms and improve their health holistically in a way that works for them as an individual. So I often combine these supplements in tandem with other things that we're doing, lifestyle things. Those are very, very important parts of the recommendations. It's not just take a pill and be good with it. However, these are some of my favorites. So let's start with the thyroid natural glandular. What the heck is that? People ask me all the time. And glandular thyroid therapies they've actually been pretty mainstream for a very long time, long before we had advancements that we do now with synthetic meds. Now, most glandulars, especially thyroid glandulars, are known as a branded pharmaceutical like Armor Thyroid or Nature Thyroid. Those are glandulars. Those are desiccated or freeze-dried thyroid glands from animal sources, typically pork or bovine sources. And taking a piece of that actual gland supports the thyroid. It gives us a boost in hormone production, so much so that it's still a mainstream practice with things like Armor and Nature Thyroid. We did this long before we developed thyroid medication. This has been a historical medical use for a long time. So this thyroid natural glandular is essentially a lower dose thyroid glandular that's available over the counter. And I'll utilize this often, very often. This glandular really shines for those subclinical hypothyroid folks. So when they have all the symptoms of hypothyroidism, but their labs just aren't in those reference ranges for a thyroid medication, they will often do very, very well on this glandular. And similarly, I'll use this probably the most for that person that comes in and says, hey, I had all the symptoms. I got on the thyroid medication. My labs are normal, but I'm still so tired and my symptoms just have not caught up with my labs. And sometimes just one bottle of the glandular even will give them that boost to get back to a well-regulated place, and then they can just go on with just their medication. Sometimes they'll just feel so much better with the glandular and they'll stick with it. And the combination of a synthetic and a glandular together just work really well, kind of hit all the bases. So I love utilizing these that way. Those folks will always get one of these per day. And you can absolutely use these in conjunction, like I mentioned, with a synthetic thyroid medication like Levo or Synthroid. And I do often, if you're staying within the suggested use, obviously, I wouldn't use these in conjunction with a glandular medication like Armor or Nature Thyroid, because there's really no point, right? It's the same mechanism. So we're not really hitting any additional bases, right? There's something else we're missing. So if you need extra support outside of current dosage of one of these, the next slide might be a better fit for you. And this is our Thyroid Nutrition with iodoral product. I love this product. I use it often. If you see here, I don't know how big we are on the screen, but I'm hoping that you can see the supplement facts here. So we talked about iodine and how important it is. This contains iodoral, which is probably an industry leader in iodine, is the one that's used here. Very bioavailable, one of the better ones out there. I'm a big fan of it. So we've got a decent dose of iodine, but not too high, so it's not in a dangerous place, combined with zinc and selenium all in there, which we've talked about, right? So remember, iodine is the building block of the thyroid, or one of the biggest blocks of thyroid hormone production. It supports the integrity of the gland. And then zinc and selenium come in and support that, right? So selenium comes in and says, oh, I'm also going to help enhance the effects of iodine, but I'm also going to protect against autoantibody production. And zinc comes in and says it's going to help with conversion and tissue sensitivity. And so those three together just work really well in tandem. It also has tyrosine, which is the other building block of thyroid hormone, right? So that combines with iodine to make thyroid hormone. So we've got all the building blocks in one bottle. Love that. Vitamin A and vitamin B12 are very supportive to the thyroid, very supportive to hormone production and conversion. So we need that there. Ashwagandha, which we touched on earlier in the stress piece, is in here, not only for that stress and adaptogenic property, even though I think it's a great thing. I use ashwagandha very, very frequently in thyroid patients, particularly hypothyroid patients, because it helps, it helps support those adrenals that play with the thyroid on these axis, right? It's very adrenal supportive, but it also has evidence that it helps with conversion as well. And it's one of the things clinically that I see when I supplement it. If someone's having conversion issues, they almost always do a lot better on ashwagandha. So people will feel ashwagandha, right? They'll feel a little less tired. They'll feel a little less stressed. And they'll just be like, oh, okay. But it's not one of those overwhelming things where it's like, oh, I just did a cup of coffee. It's like, we'll dose ashwagandha for a week. I'll call them. I'll say, hey, how have you been doing? They're like, oh, now that you ask, like I've had a great week. I haven't had any, crying over spilled milk fits. I haven't, been forgetting things as much. I feel like, oh, I feel good. And I almost didn't even notice, and that's what I love about it. It's a really good supportive one for that. Coleus is also in here, which is all the herbalists in the room will know that is one of the ones that we always think about with thyroid, right? So it's just a thyroid herb that's really, it's almost a tropho-restorative for the gland itself. So I love this as a general supplement product, right? Sometimes people don't want to be thinking about like, did I take my Brazil nuts and this and this and this? And so if someone comes in and they're saying, you know what, I have, I'm struggling with my thyroid, or I have all these thyroid symptoms. I am not, in that place where I need medication or whatever. I will combining this. It's got everything we need, all the building blocks to support it around the thyroid, combining it with that thyroid glandular, which is your direct thyroid gland, so that everything just works really well together. It's got, these are all the tools it needs, right? These are the training. So it's like that thyroid glandular is the punch we need. This is all the training. This is all the time in the ring. This is everything we need around that to make that a more effective punch. And so these pair really well together. But if for some reason we're not using a glandular, we're not using something, this thyroid nutrition is just a well-rounded, well-made, well-balanced kind of everything you need for your thyroid to be functioning optimally. So I'll use that as well. And so I just want to say thank you so much for attending. I hope you got some well-rounded information about caring for your thyroid holistically. If you have any questions about these products or how to do that, please ask the folks at Weiner Wellness. They are wonderful and they will get you going and they'll get